Okay, now to make sure that FTP is working, we have to first double check to make sure that we have our users set up correctly. Now, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, just review here. In our initpub folder, our main default website is actually located in this directory, www.root, and then we have a second website that we're hosting in FTP root under the folder Mount Zion, named after our domain name, under a folder named Dan. Now what we're going to need for this is, for this site, we're going to want to have a user named Dan, alright? And then for our default website, under the www, we'll, let's say, have an admin user. So let's make sure we have those users set up. So we'll just open up our users and computers, and we'll make sure that we have a user set up for that. Okay, so we have a user named Dan. Really quickly, I'm going to change the password on that. Reset password to a new password here, so I don't remember the password. Alright, so I changed the password there. And then we're going to make a new user for our default website, which we'll call web admin. So I'll say new user, and we'll name him web admin, and username will be web admin. Alright, we'll say next, and we'll give him a password. Alright, and password never expires. Alright, we'll say finish. Okay. Alright, so we've got a user there, and since this user is an administrator, we're going to make them a member of the administrative group. So we'll say admin, check names. Okay, click OK. Administrators, maybe domain administrators, domain admins. Alright, and click OK. So it's a domain admin. Alright, that sounds good. Click OK. So we've got a username web admin, and we've got a username Dan. Now that we've done that, I want to check the permissions on this root folder. Properties, security, and just to see, administrators have access to this folder, and users, and IIS users. Okay, that's fine. Alright, so now we're going to go back and we'll set up FTP for our default website first. Alright, so for our default website, what I'm going to do is I'll select it, and then I'll scroll down here, and I'll say Add FTP Publishing. So click Add FTP Publishing, and we're going to bind it to port 21 by default. Start FTP Site automatically, right? And we're going to say, we'll start off saying no SSL, or we'll say allow SSL, right? And for SSL certificate, we'll use my certificate, which is our self-signed certificate that we created, right? That sounds good. We'll allow SSL because eventually we're going to want to get secure socket layer working, TLS, transport layer security working. So we'll hit next. And authentication, we'll say that not anonymous, you need to have basic authentication, and allow access to, right? We'll say specified users, and we'll say web admin, right? Web admin, and we'll give them read and write permissions. So specified person has access to this site, and we'll hit finish. Okay, FTP publishing was successfully added. Alright, and it says you must refresh the home page, so we could restart the web server, and let's see here. Okay, now that we have FTP enabled for this website, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to configure it. So we're going to go down here, We're going to go down to FTP, right? Where's FTP here? We're going to need to refresh this because I don't even see FTP listed here, right, at all. So, right, and you can see here I should have some FTP settings right here, and I'm not seeing that at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our main server here, and I'm going to restart the server. I don't know if that was necessary or not, probably wasn't, but now if I go back to default website we should see those tools, right? And now we do. So now if I click on default website you can see that I've got ASP tools, and then I've got FTP tools, and I've got IIS tools, and so on and so forth. So now I have these FTP tools which I'm going to need to configure. Also I can restart the website here, and now I have some FTP settings here. I can restart and stop the FTP server or the FTP site, and I can also go to Advanced Settings. Let's click on Manage FTP Site Advanced Settings and see what it brings up. Okay, it brings up this dialog box, and we can see that it's the www root folder, right? Okay, that looks good. We're going to need some more settings for this. So we'll say under, notice I've got, it's very important you have default website selected. FTP authentication, basic authentication is enabled. We'll hit edit, and we'll say default domain is mountzion.com. Okay, click OK there. Then I'll go back arrow and FTP authorization, and you can see here that there's one user allowed, web admin, which we created when we first began, right? So there's one user. We could add more users here, or authorization rules right there. FTP firewall support. Let's click this. Now if this was a public server and we had a firewall, a router, we would put our public IP address here, right? Since we don't have a public IP address, and this is just private, I'm going to put in my private address here. And hopefully that doesn't mess things up. Click apply. Okay, that looks good, right? I'll get back. Normally this would be the public IP address of your router. Okay, FTP messages, we can double click that, and we can say, alright, suppress the default banner, and we can bring our own banner message. We'll say, hello, Mount Zion .com FTP server. Okay. Hello, exit, bye. Right. So anyway, we could set maximum number of connections, all that stuff, right? So we've got some default messages here, which someone will see if they connect to the FTP site. All right, I'll hit back. So that was FTP messages, right? Now FTP SSL settings. Right now, we are allowing SSL connections, but we're not requiring them. Eventually, we'd like to move from just allow to require or to custom, so that we can have secure, let's say, we can secure, encrypt user login, right? Username passwords could be protected with encryption if we require SSL connections or set up a custom SSL connection. We'll do that later. Okay, we'll go back here. Once again, we still have default website selected. And then for this one, we'll say FTP user isolation. So this is an important one right here. I'm going to double click on this one. And since this is our default website, we can start the user in the FTP root directory, right? This is fine, which will be our www directory, hopefully, right? Because this is for our default site. But when we go to create our other site for our other websites, for like this Dan website right here, we will isolate the user to a specific directory. So we'll show you how to do that later. For right now, this is fine. Okay, so we've made some settings changes here, right? everything looks pretty good. We will restart our FTP server, and we'll try to connect to our FTP server. Now, another thing that we're going to need to take into consideration is our firewall settings. Let's take a glance at them before we try to connect to it. So I went to Start, Advanced Firewall Security here. Right? Here it is. And I'm going to go to Inbound Rules. And I'm going to scroll down to FTP. Okay? And you can see here we have FTP server traffic in, right? Okay? On port 21. And that's it looks like. It doesn't look like we have any other rules allowing traffic in. We'll see if that's enough. With secure, using SSL and FTPS, FTP secure over transport layer security, that's not going to be enough, right? Just opening up port 21 will not be enough in that case. So this is something that we're going to have to revisit, our firewall settings. And also, once again, if this was a public web server, IIS web server, and a public IIS FTP server, we would have to open up the same ports on our router. Okay, our router that faces the public. All right.